Let's call him Ethan. Ethan first noticed his depression in the way that mornings stopped asking anything of him. Not in a dramatic way, no breakdown, no single moment where everything cracked. Just a slow removal of pressure from the day ahead. Like life had stopped expecting him to participate. At first, he thought this was a relief. Less stress, less urgency, less noise. But after a while, he realized something uncomfortable. Relief is supposed to feel lighter. This didn't feel light. It felt heavy, and it felt flat. He started waking up and lying still longer than he used to. Not thinking about anything intense, just not moving. The ceiling fan became familiar in a way that didn't feel comforting. It was just always there, like it had replaced the idea of starting the day. His phone would buzz sometimes, he'd glance at it and put it back down. Not because he was busy, because responding felt slightly too far away. Like reaching for something across a room, and that room keeps getting longer and longer every time you try. People around him didn't notice anything immediately. That's how it usually works. Because Ethan still showed up at the start. He still smiled at the right moments, still said "I'm good" when asked, still laughed occasionally, even when it didn't fully land in him. From the outside, nothing had collapsed. Only from the inside, where things didn't break, they faded. One afternoon, Mark, a different character in the story, sat down beside him without asking. They were outside near campus, people moving around them, talking, going somewhere. Ethan wasn't going anywhere in particular. Mark watched him for a second, not staring, just observing, in a way that felt heavier than normal conversation. "You've been quiet lately," Mark said. Ethan shrugged, not defensively, not emotional, just automatic, like a natural response. "I'm just tired." Mark didn't accept it or reject it. He just nodded slowly, like he was setting that answer aside for later. There was a pause. Then Mark said something simpler. "Is it just tired, or is it everything?" Ethan didn't answer right away because the question didn't have a quick place to land. Tired made sense. Everything didn't. But something in him hesitated longer than usual, and that hesitation itself felt like information. That night, Ethan stood in his kitchen and forgot why he was there. It wasn't dramatic. He just opened the fridge, stared inside, and didn't feel pulled toward anything in it. Not hunger, exactly, not refusal either, just absence of direction. He closed it again, leaned against the counter, and stood there for a while longer than necessary. Time didn't feel broken, it just didn't feel like it was moving towards anything. Days started blending in a way that he couldn't point to on a calendar. Not because they were busy, because they were similar. Wake up, stare at the ceiling, scroll, pause, go through motions, return to bed, repeat. Even conversations began to feel like he was copying responses from a version of himself that used to exist. People would talk and he would answer appropriately. But inside there was a delay. Like everything had to travel further before reaching him. One evening, Mark texted him, "Come out, just for a bit." Ethan stared at it for a long time. His first thought was simple: I won't enjoy it. He didn't even argue with that thought. It just appeared like a conclusion that was already decided. So instead of replying immediately, he waited. And in that waiting, something subtle happened. Another thought showed up. Not louder, just quieter. "You don't actually know that." Ethan stared at that sentence longer than the first one. And because it didn't demand anything, it didn't promise anything either, it just interrupted, certainly. He ended up going, not because he felt motivated, not because anything had improved, but because staying in his room suddenly felt like the same answer repeating itself without checking if it was still true. Outside, the air felt normal, and that was the first strange part, because nothing felt different enough to justify how differently everything had felt lately. Mark was already there, and he didn't make a big deal of Ethan arriving, just moved over slightly to make space. He didn't talk much at first. There was dramatic, "How are you really?" moment, just presence. People around them, talking, laughing, existing in ways that didn't require explanation. Ethan mostly listened, not actively participating, but not fully absent either. At one point, Someone said something ridiculous, and the group broke out in laughter. It was sudden, loud, and unplanned. Ethan didn't laugh right away. His mind started doing what it usually did, checking if he was supposed to do, or what he was supposed to do, whether it was appropriate, whether it would make him feel like it was forced. But halfway through that process, something interrupted it. The sound itself. Real laughter. Something happening in real time, not inside of his head. And something in him responded before he could evaluate it. A small laugh. Something not strong, not complete, but real enough that he noticed it afterwards. And that noticing mattered, because it meant that he was still reachable. He was still alive. He was still in there. On the walk home, nothing dramatic changed. There was no sudden clarity, no emotional breakthrough, and no transformation, but Ethan realized something small that felt unexpectedly important. Earlier that day, the day would have passed through him completely. But tonight, parts of it had actually reached him. Not all of it, but enough to notice the difference. And for the first time in a while, he didn't conclude anything final about himself. He didn't decide he was getting better. He didn't decide he was stuck. He didn't decide he was getting worse. He just allowed for the possibility that his earlier conclusions might not have been the full picture. And in a life that had slowly narrowed into certainty without evidence, that uncertainty didn't feel like confusion. It felt like space.